Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's event with Derrik J. Lang, the senior editor of American Way, of course, American Airlines' premier in-flight publication. If you're tuned in via YouTube recording, be sure to hit subscribe to learn about future events. Derrik, how are you?
Great. How are you, Dennis?
I'm doing so well, and we're so lucky to have you. Can you tell us about yourself and your professional background?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm the senior editor of American Way, which is the main in-flight magazine for American Airlines, available in all the seat back pockets, as well as at the Admirals Clubs. I started in this role in November of last year, so still relatively a newbie. And prior to that, I covered entertainment, technology, and lifestyles at the Associated Press for 12 years, primarily focusing on film and TV and video games and pop culture in general.
And before this webinar started, you mentioned a little bit about your Associated Press work. Can you just tell us the difference in working sort of day by day, covering that daily news cycle versus, let's say, the challenges of running and of course the benefits and the opportunities of running a magazine, which has longer lead times, of course?
Yeah, definitely very different when it comes to deadlines. At the AP, there weren't really any deadlines. The deadlines were how fast it took you to write the story and to get it onto the wire. Whereas now with American Way, we publish about 3 months out. And so we still have a lot of deadlines to deal with, but they're just very different in terms of production and interviews and getting everything lined up and looking beautiful. But yeah, very different situations indeed when it comes to work.
Audience members, if you have any questions, which we hope you do, feel free to tweet them in. The link is over there, but it's Max Vangeli DGTL plus the hashtag PR, and we'll be sure to get to them at the end. Derrik, according to your magazine's media kit, after 4 decades of existence, American Way has been beautifully reimagined to match the aspirations of 201 plus million discerning passengers. American Way is a stunning exercise in the art of modern magazine making, unquote. Can you walk us through the changes made to your publication?
Sure. Part of it is we have a whole new team working on the magazine now out of Miami, which is a major hub for American Airlines. And really what we wanted to do in reimagining the magazine, we relaunched it in January, is make it more timely, more specific, fresher, and give it a really fun look that will keep passengers entertained when they're on the planes or in the Admirals Clubs. So going back, the first thing is timeliness. Now, hopefully everything in the magazine has a reason for existence in that month. So we want people to be able to go to a festival they're reading about, or go to a new hotel that they're reading about that month, or at least they'll be interested in it because it's happening. We're not directly competing with social media because a lot of people don't pay for the internet on the plane, but that has changed the way that people consume media, and so we've made a lot of changes to address that. So people will be more interested in the information and be able to consume it in a quicker, kind of more bite-sized way when it comes to the front of the book. And then visually, we've given it a total overhaul with new graphics, new sections, and a huge focus on original photography. So we try not to rely too much on pre-existing portraits and things like that, especially with our features. We want to shoot those or illustrate those and make them look totally inviting and dynamic and gorgeous.
That's so interesting, and as you mentioned, that you are in a way competing with the internet, but you're not, of course, because I mean I think we've all flown on an airplane and opened that magazine, and you guys do have a beautiful magazine, and it's so interesting because American Airlines, it feels like they started with the planes and they made these, you know, beautiful new custom planes, and then they just went about polishing every part of the brand, including you guys. And original content, photography, is that in response to Instagram and people's love of beautiful imagery today, or why is there such an emphasis on photo shoots and original photography?
I mean, I think that's a little bit about the change. I mean, we all are kind of amateur photographers now because we have great cameras in our pockets. So I think that's a little bit about it, but I also just think we wanted to elevate the magazine and be right up there with, you know, Vanity Fair and Wired and Entertainment Weekly and other magazines that our passengers, you know, consume. So, you know, I think it's just really about making something that people feel passionate about and feel invited into when they're going across the magazine. Because let's face it, people look at pictures before they read the stories.
Mm. You know, American Way reaches millions of passengers every month, and a diverse set of passengers between Americans and Latin Americans, Asians. I mean, you guys obviously cover the whole world, and then and if you include partner airlines, really the whole world. How do you and your teammates go about meeting the interests of such a large and diverse set of people?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's definitely a challenge, and it was part of our thinking when we were relaunching the magazine, is that we want the diverse popular passenger population to see themselves in the magazine, whether it's the destinations we're writing about or the celebrities we're writing about. So we think about that when we are looking at the magazine as a whole. Do we have destinations in Asia? Are we representing the passengers when it comes to the people that we're interviewing for stories or the celebrities that we're talking about? For me, with my background, it's not too much of a challenge, because when I was working at the Associated Press, you know, I was writing stories that an 8-year-old might be reading or an 80-year-old could be reading. And the same is true for American Way. When you look at the plane, there are all walks of life, from the very back row to first class cabin. So really, when we're starting out, we have a very diverse editorial team. So our interests are varied. You know, I'm the pop culture guy. I love entertainment. I love riding roller coasters. Our editor-in-chief, Bill Carney, he's a sportsman. He likes fishing and hunting. So we do start out just kind of relying on what we're interested in, and then we broaden that net to make sure that we are, you know, coming up with interesting stories that everybody in every row of the magazine would be interested in, even if it's not something they thought they might be interested in. A good example is that in the current issue, we have a story about this woman who is responsible basically for getting the first ever bees on the endangered species list. And this wasn't necessarily a story that I would have personally been interested in, but reading about how this woman from Staten Island, who's just a drummer, is responsible for getting bees on the endangered species list caught my attention, and I hope it caught everybody else's attention too, because it's an important story.
Mm. And how much does geography play into stories? In other words, do you that story, is it critical that it's within X amount of miles where American flies, or do you guys not pay attention to that?
We do pay attention to that. Obviously, we are an American Airlines publication, and we want to highlight and spotlight all of the destinations that American Airlines visits. So we try to stick to covering stories that are, you know, within, you know, a couple of hours of American Airlines destinations. It's not to say we ignore stories everywhere else in the world. We have a couple of times done some stories on places that American doesn't necessarily fly itself, but on the whole, we like to stick to where the airline actually goes and spotlight interesting stories and places and ideas of places where people could go on their next flight.
Absolutely. And in every issue, there are a few regular segments, including Need to Know and Features. Can you give us an overview of these sections and similar sections?
Sure. So Need to Know is our new front of the book section, and it's all about what you need to know that month, going from travel to pop culture, food and drink, sports, fashion, anything that falls under a timely kind of umbrella of why you need to know that month. And they're short, bite-sized stories. It's a very visually driven section, so we have fun infographics sometimes and charts and just really interesting dynamic entry points for the readers to go into as they're going across the section. And then that's followed up by Voices, which is our essay section. We have 3 super interesting stories. Sometimes they're from celebrities, authors. To give you a little peek, we actually have one written by a dog coming out next month. So it's fun and sometimes poignant essays. And then we move on to our features, which are 6 to 8 page intense stories with original photography about what makes Americans Americans, or visiting really interesting places that we can travel, where we really focus in on subjects. And we always have a cover star, so our first feature is always spotlighting a celebrity that hopefully you know their name, but maybe you don't know too much about them, and you get to know them and see some great portraits of them over the story. And then as part of the features, our last feature is a new section that we started when we relaunched the magazine in January called Neighborhood Watch, which is a super specific profile of a neighborhood in an interesting city. So a couple of examples of those, I think, is Soho in London, Wynwood in Miami. We just did Oud West in Amsterdam. And we really get to know the people in that neighborhood. And then our back page is called My Travel Tales. And it's a celebrity telling us some funny, interesting places they've been and some stories from their tales on the road. And yeah, that's how we cap it off.
How fun. And stories like that, or features of neighborhoods, is every time is a member of your staff going to physically experience it and cover it, or do you have someone on the ground? How do the logistics of that come together?
Both, actually. We have sent people to neighborhoods, and we've also relied on writers who are based in those neighborhoods. So we like to do a little mix because, often locals know their neighborhoods better than anybody else, but sometimes it's interesting to get an outside point of view and what they think is going on. So we've done it both ways. We've had staffers go, and then we've had writers that are based in those cities write the Neighborhood Watch feature.
It's great that you do that you guys give freelancers an opportunity. Speaking of that, can you give us a picture of your team? In other words, full-time folks versus freelance versus any syndication you guys might do?
Yeah, so we have a pretty svelte team here in Miami. We have a couple of editors and our art team, and no full-time writers on staff, although all the editors are also writers. So we do mostly rely on freelancers when it comes to writing stories that we don't necessarily do ourselves. And we don't use any syndicated material or anything like that. It's all original.
Okay. And in the most recent issue, you wrote about a piece about Game of Thrones tourism, more specifically visiting Castle Ward in Northern Ireland, or as it's known in Game of Thrones, Winterfell. What was that experience like, and how did it come to fruition?
Yeah, so I was actually part of a trip in Ireland going to the travel Classics conference. So it was just kind of a side trip. Part of the stories that we like now in the New American Way are stories that have a crossover appeal. So they may not necessarily just be a travel story or just be an entertainment story or just be a story about technology. So obviously people are interested in going there because it has been so prominent in Game of Thrones, but it's also just a fun destination to visit on its own. So it's kind of a good example of a story where we can highlight a fun destination. We can also call out the pop culture connection. And yeah, so it was just really fun. And I learned that I'm almost as good at archery as Jon Snow, or I'd like to think I am.
And a story like that was, do you recall if that was pitched out by a PR person, or you and your team just kind of found out about it, or how how did that come together?
Yeah, well, Fáilte Ireland, the Tourism Ireland organizations, actually had recommended it because they knew I was coming to Ireland and they knew that I was interested in all of the great films and TV shows that have been filming in Ireland recently, like Game of Thrones and like Star Wars. So they kind of knew that I was interested in that and had suggested that I visit the real life Winterfell.
Wow, sounds like such a fun experience, and I can only imagine how many others got inspired to do the same thing. There's a there's a four-page piece about Yeonnam-dong. Sorry to any Koreans if I totally butchered that. A calm, upcoming neighborhood located in the western part of Seoul, South Korea. It's modernizing, but in a way that keeps the neighborhood sort of a neighborhood vibe, an anti-Gangnam of sorts, as you guys called it. Can you walk us through this piece and how it came together?
Yeah, so that was the neighborhood watch for that month. So we do a mix of domestic neighborhoods and international neighborhoods, always obviously somewhere that American Airlines services. And we like to change it up with that story. Obviously, the neighborhood needs to be somewhere that people would have fun and learn about from visiting. So there should be, restaurants, places to stay, places to drink, that sort of thing. So that's kind of how we start out. It's places that are interesting, but they also have to have a story because we want to learn about the locals and we want to learn about what makes this neighborhood unique. So a lot of the times the neighborhood watch feature is often a neighborhood that people kind of forgot about and it's kind of turned around. So examples of that would be we did Wynwood in Miami, which was a warehouse district and now has been brought back to life with breweries and amazing street art and some phenomenal restaurants. And we did downtown Los Angeles, which was kind of a gritty part of LA that a lot of people didn't visit. I know from living in LA for 8 years. And now in the past couple of years, it's had a total cultural renaissance and so much is happening down there. But then there's other neighborhoods like Ud West and Yeonnam-dong in South Korea that have been there a long time and they're keeping up their vibe and inviting visitors to come in and learn about it. Maybe they're not necessarily quote unquote hipster neighborhoods, but they still have merit and they're interesting places to read about.
That's really interesting. In other words, they need to have a segment of live, work, play, or at least live, play, but then they're also very diverse, as you mentioned, Wynwood, which went from sort of a boring industrial neighborhood into something that is beautiful and fun and playful and all those things. And as you mentioned, downtown Los Angeles, maybe at some point you guys will get to downtown Las Vegas as well, but that's so interesting. You guys receive tens of thousands of emails every year from readers, as I understand, particularly via in-flight. What are they writing about?
You know, they are asking about, you know, a lot of it is comments. We've really added more celebrities to the magazine now. So we do have our cover star, and then we also have spotlight some celebrities in the need to know section in the front of the book, and then we have my travel tales, the back page, which is a celebrity. So a lot of the conversation is fans of these folks excited that they're being spotlighted in the magazine. You know, a lot of people want information, more information about destinations and things like that. For us, what we're finding and what we're interested in pursuing is that the conversation is moving off of email and it's moving on to social media. And so we find a lot of people sharing pictures of the magazine or, you know, their trips that were inspired by things in the magazine on Instagram and Facebook and social media. So we're trying to tap into that more, and as part of that, we have redesigned our letters to the editor page, where it's no longer just a series of emails. Now we're highlighting an Instagram post that was shared by a celebrity who was featured in the magazine thousands of times, or a tweet that somebody said about a story that they really liked that inspired them to go on a trip. So we're switching it up, so it's not just about email, to sort of make it come alive. And going back to what I was saying earlier, that, you know, social media has totally changed the game, and so we're adapting accordingly.
It's interesting. You mentioned, for example, with Game of Thrones, the cultural relevance piece, so that it's not simply a travel story, but also has a cultural tie. And then now you guys are a little more celebrity driven. Speaking of celebrities, how much are these celebrities sort of traditional celebrities, you know, like a Halle Berry or someone like that, versus sort of the new form of celebrities, your YouTubers and other social stars?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't really spotlighted a YouTuber or an influencer yet, not saying that we wouldn't. We've stuck mostly to athletes, actors, musicians, things like that. We don't, I mean, we're not Entertainment Weekly, so we don't have a lot of space to dedicate to entertainment, so we have to be judicious about who we do feature. But that's, you know, something that we would be open to in the future, is spotlighting these sort of new forms of celebrities that have emerged online. But we, you know, it's just like the passenger population. We try to be as diverse as possible and come up with different genres and people from different places in the world. And the cover, like I was saying before, we like to be somebody who hopefully you've heard of, maybe you don't know so much about them and you can learn more about them. And then in the need to know section, we're introducing up-and-comers sometimes, but also we're checking in with people like Pierce Brosnan doing a Western show after being James Bond for so many years. So it's all over the place when it comes to, you know, age and racial diversity, sexual orientation. We want to see everybody from all backgrounds in the magazine, celebrity or otherwise.
That's really great to hear. And audience members, again, if you have questions, submit them through the webinar platform right here, through Twitter, however you want to do it. Let's get those questions in. We'll get to them at the end. So Derrik, how does content planning work? Do you use an annual editorial calendar?
We really don't. We publish 3 months out for every issue. The issues are always on planes the month of release. So the September issue will be in planes and Admirals Clubs for all of September, and then it gets swapped out at the end of the month, and October 1st is a new issue. So far, we haven't really planned any theme issues or, you know, anything necessarily holiday related, except maybe some need to know stories here and there. So we don't really have an editorial calendar when it comes to pitches and story ideas. We need to know those at least 3 months out. Obviously, some stuff has been charted way in advance. So it just sort of depends.
So to recap, you don't rely on an editorial calendar, but we do need to be mindful of the fact that you have a fairly long lead time, 3 months.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, at this point, I'm really booking for the December issues and beyond. So I will receive pitches and emails from folks wanting to get into the November issue or the October issue, and the train has left the station at this point. So that's the most important thing to keep in mind.
Speaking of the holidays, we have an audience member question from Maura Dugan who asks, do you have a product gift guide for the holidays?
This is probably the #1 question that I have been receiving in the past few months. The answer, unfortunately, I think for the person asking is no. We're not planning to do a traditional gift guide. However, we do spotlight products that we think are interesting, that our readers would be interested in all year long. So, feel free to send those pitches along. For the need to know, we like stories that are unexpected or quirky or interesting. So if there's any products that kind of fall under that umbrella, feel free to let me know about them. But no, we don't have a traditional sort of gift guide planned. It's going to be the need to know section as usual, with maybe a couple of fun products thrown in there.
Okay, and you mentioned that that's your the number one question you're getting from PR folks at the moment. Approximately how many PR pitches do you receive on a weekly basis, and how can publicists be most helpful in communicating with you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I receive, hundreds of emails sometimes in a day. I think what I find is most helpful and most successful for both parties involved is to just be very specific. We're not doing evergreen stories anymore, and we're not really looking to fill specific holes, meaning if you email me, say, hey, I've got this, if you're doing a Cabo story, or if you need to do a story about luggage, I've got this, new suitcase coming out. For us, it's really about finding unique, unexpected stories. So honing that in and coming up with a specific pitch is way more helpful than sending in something that's very general or kind of just following a pattern of trends. We find that that's the stuff that we end up putting in the magazine, where it has a place that fits the tone and the style of the New American Way.
It's a pleasure to hear you say that, because as you mentioned, not all, but some in-flight magazines in the past did not take this approach, and it's a pleasure to hear that you guys understand just the wide range of content that you're in a way competing with and that people are looking for. That's really nice. And how do you see American Way magazine evolving over the next 5 years?
I think we're just going to keep doing what we're doing and see what works and what doesn't. So far, the response has been phenomenal. People really are engaged and love the new magazine, and love what we're doing visually and the kinds of subjects that we're writing about and bringing a freshness to it. I think going forward, what we'd really like to do is definitely connect to the digital landscape and do a better job of that. A lot of the conversation, as I was saying before, from our readers is happening online. So we want to be where they are. And we also want to incorporate video as well. We have great photo shoots from our destination stories and with our celebrity portraits, and we can really leverage that access and put video in the in-flight entertainment systems on the airplanes. So we're looking to do that more. There's a couple of instances of that coming up, and we'd like to share that more socially. So I think that's kind of where we're headed, while still obviously making a really fun, colorful magazine that puts people in a good mood when they're on the plane.
Absolutely. And we have a few audience member questions, which is great. The first one comes from Lisa, and she asks, do you have a particular focus in health stories that are most likely to fit your editorial needs? I'm assuming an exergaming story would be more interesting than a story about vaccines?
That would be right. Yeah, exergaming would be really cool. Anything, we definitely like to highlight wellness. So stories about sports or gyms. Obviously, spas are huge. But yes, we like that kind of quirky edge to it. So, combining exercise and gaming would definitely be more interesting. I can't imagine we'd ever have a story about vaccines. I'm not sure how to make that very fun.
Yeah, that'd be a tricky one. So, we have a question from Ariella. She asks, do you only write about destinations where American flies, or is there an opportunity to pitch stories for other locations which are large tourist destinations?
Yeah, as I was saying before, we try to stick to the places that American Airlines services. There have been a couple of instances where we have spotlighted places where American Airlines partners fly, but it's very, very rare. So I think to be the most successful is to keep it to places where the airline flies. Now, obviously, some places aren't right next to an airport. So if it's within a few hours driving distance of somewhere or a train or something like that, that's fine. And we have been covering cruises more. So, we like to spotlight other forms of transportation. So there are ways to go about it, but for the most part, no. We like to stick to the realm of American Airlines own flights.
And we have a question from Deanna who asks, what is the best way for a DMO to get your attention through a pitch?
Oh, Dennis, you might have to help me out here. What's a DMO?
Deanna, please help us. We have no idea what a DMO. I don't know, so we're going to move on. But Deanna, if you can get, oh, there we go. We got it. It is, thanks, Deanna. It's a destination marketing organization. So,
right.
Okay, here we go. Such as a tourism bureau. So, in other words, what is the best way for a DMO, destination marketing organization, to get your attention through a pitch? Thanks, Deanna.
Yeah, definitely. CVB, DMO, it's all, I'd like to buy a vowel. Yeah, I mean, just email us and come up with specific ideas that would work for the tone of the magazine. I think, we hear from CVBs and DMOs all the time with just a general list of things that are going on. I think what would be more successful is finding a month or two where there is an intense reason, whether it's a festival or a bunch of new restaurants opening or something going on, and let us know about that, and that maybe we should feature the destination in the magazine that month because of X, Y, and Z. I think that would grab our attention a little bit more than something general that's just like, hey, here's what's going on in the city all the time. Yeah, I mean, for the neighborhood watch I have been getting a lot of correspondence from folks who are interested in having their cities represented. For the most part, well, not the most part, for all of the part, we have been picking and choosing those destinations ourselves. So I don't know if that's such a great usage of your time. I mean, it doesn't hurt to say, hey, this neighborhood in my city is amazing and here's why. That might get us thinking about it a little bit more. But for that specific story, so far, we've been choosing the neighborhoods. Because as I was saying, we want to have diversity in the places that we're covering. So maybe it's a place that's fun in the winter one month and a place that has beaches the next, and switching it up between international and domestic destinations.
You
I
know,
hope
it's
that answers
interesting.
your question, Deanna.
Deanna, hopefully it does. And Derrik, as you know, we had Layla Kobo a couple of weeks ago, your colleague, who is, of course, in a similar role with Nexos magazine, which is American Airlines bilingual Spanish and Portuguese publication. And she mentioned that visitor and convention bureaus to her are useful when it comes to things that you wouldn't necessarily find on Google, or maybe you just wouldn't think about. Maybe even something like what you had mentioned with Game of Thrones tourism versus just going on the same trip everybody else does in Ireland.
Yeah, totally. And they often are a great source because they know things that haven't been necessarily released in a press release or in some other form. You know, a good example of that is when we were covering downtown LA in Neighborhood Watch. We wanted a list of hotels because there's a huge hotel boom happening in downtown LA. And the Los Angeles Convention and Visitors Bureau was super helpful and knew about a couple of places that we had known about that were opening. So yeah, they can definitely be a good inside source for that kind of stuff.
We have another question. Nancy asks, I've had 2 hip replacements and specialize in equestrian travel. Would I pitch voices and share places I've ridden where you fly and my personal journey getting back in the saddle?
Yeah, that sounds like it could be a good essay. For the voices sections, the essays are generally either 500 words or sometimes 800 words, which 500 words is not a lot of words. So we like those stories to be super specific and talk about a journey, literal or figurative. So it could be about travel, or it could just be a compelling, interesting story. So yeah, you know, shoot me an email or reach me on social media at Derrik J. Lang, and let me know. We're always looking for good ideas for voices essays. It's not easy sometimes to tell a story that has a cohesive beginning and a middle and an end. So it can often be challenging finding those that we think that will really be compelling.
Someone's asking, how many magazines/publications does AA have?
Yeah, so we have My Magazine, which is the main magazine that's available in all cabins American way. And then we have, as you mentioned, Dennis, Nexos, which is our Spanish and Portuguese language magazine that's available on a lot of routes, mostly those servicing Latin America and a little bit beyond. And then we have our premium cabin magazine, Celebrated Living, which is in the first and business class cabins. And then all 3 of those, of course, are available in Admirals Clubs. So Nexus and Celebrated Living are bi-monthly, and American Way is monthly.
Okay, thank you for that. Hopefully that answers the question. And then someone wants to know if you can elaborate on bite-sized stories versus long-form stories. And I actually that's it. But I guess elaborating on bite-sized content.
Yeah, I don't, yeah, so our need to know section, I guess, is what you would consider bite-sized. Those stories are 500 words or less. And that's really where the newsy bits are in the magazine, the newsiest bits, I guess I should say. And yeah, so those sort of run the gamut from 50-word stories to 500-word stories. Sometimes we go a little bit longer. The essays are always 500 words, and then the features are, you know, 2,000 words generally, depending on sidebars and things like that. So those are definitely a lot longer and meatier.
Fair enough. And we have a couple more audience member questions, which is great because we have 6 minutes left. So thank you, audience members. And obviously, thank you, Derrik. I'm sure you're a very busy person, and we do, on behalf of everyone in this event, appreciate your time today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. Lisa has a question. She says, hi, sorry, audio cut out. She's asking, what is the best way to contact Derrik? Derrik J. Lang via Twitter or some other way?
Yeah, probably email is the best way. So it's Derrik, DERRIK .lang, LANG, @inc-global.com. That's the best way. But if you want to follow me on Twitter or reach out that way, we can connect that way too.
Perfect.
It's just on all social media channels. I'm at Derrik J. Lang, DERRIKJLANG. So Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, everything.
And audience members, we will send out all of that information in the follow-up email. In case you didn't write it down, no worries, you will have it. Erica is asking, if we are working with a tourism board and have a trip planned with them, do you recommend to pitch a story before the trip or after in order to secure the assignment?
It really depends. I mean, it actually doesn't matter. If the story is really interesting, it can be helpful to know about it ahead of time, so that way you do the reporting that's necessary and you think visually about the story to get what we need. But we can work in reverse as well. Sometimes, you know, you go on a trip and you don't know that you're going to come across a story that would be great for the need to know section. So either way is fine. It's probably a bit more helpful if we know going into it. But because of the sort of house of cards nature of the need to know section, we don't always assign those super far out. So I may usually ask writers to hold off and see what other stories we have going on, because you know, we don't want to have too many stories that are set in the Southwest or too many entertainment stories or something like that. We like to have a nice mix. So sometimes that requires, you know, waiting a little bit closer to the publishing of the magazine.
And Derrik, we're almost done for today, unfortunately. What is your favorite part about being involved with American Way and joining this new team in this beautiful new publication?
Oh, you wait till the very end for the hardest question. I think it's really just celebrating travel and exploring the world, whether that's through a movie star or whether that's literally getting on a plane and going somewhere, or maybe reading about a place or something that you don't necessarily want to do yourself, but you're fascinated by. So I don't know, I just constantly get excited by all of the different sorts of stories, whether they're about travel or entertainment or technology, that we're able to spotlight in the magazine. So yeah, I think it's just this, you know, cornucopia of content, and it's just great getting to travel myself and getting to talk to interesting people for the magazine and talk to really great freelance writers that we have that go to the ends of the earth sometimes for some of these stories, or just come up with really great ideas. I've only been doing this since November, but I'm just constantly amazed and excited by the stories, and I hope that translates into what we're producing and what people are reading on the planes.
You guys legitimately have a really impressive publication, and I personally think it's a pleasure to see in-flight magazines done right, where they are many, many notches above the bare minimum, and you guys achieved that. And with that, Derrik, thank you again for your time and all of the wisdom and insights you've shared with us. And on behalf of everyone in this event, have a great afternoon.
Thanks so much, Dennis. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about everything that we've been working on at the New American Way.
It's our pleasure. Bye, everyone.